I don't know who the author of Hebrews is, but I think he would be right at home watching a big screen television, watching ESPN, NFL, Sunday Ticket, the MLB Network, NBA TV, NHL Network, Pac-12 Network, and TUDN. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you're probably not into sports. By the way, the most important channels for sports fan are actually the locals, ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC. They're the ones that cover almost all of the major sporting events of the year, including the Super Bowl, the World Series, the NBA Finals, and plus most of the NFL regular season playoff games that are going on right now. Whether or not the author of Hebrews was a sports fan, I don't know, but he does begin the 12th chapter with a sports metaphor, specifically of running a race. Let's look at it again in verse 1. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, there's a pretty good probability that the author may have had in mind the athletic competition of the Olympic Stadium. And he compares the Christian life to a foot race. And I don't know if he was thinking of a sprint or a marathon, or it seems to me that life is more often like an obstacle course than anything else. But his point is that we're not spectators sitting in the stands watching other people compete. We are the ones who are running. I want you to hear me this morning. If you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, you are running a race. Whether you realize it or not, you are in a race. So the issue is not whether you're running, but how are you running? And notice that this chapter begins with the word therefore, and a just general good rule of interpretation is when you come to the word therefore, see what it's there for. Indicates that the author is coming to some sort of summary or conclusion or application about the things he's been writing or discussing. We could actually paraphrase this, so then, or for that reason, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses, let us run the race that's set before us. What is this cloud of witnesses? Well, it's all the people, all the heroes of faith that he mentions in the 11th chapter. Why does he call them a cloud, a word that's only used here in the New Testament? I don't think he's talking about white puffy things that float through the sky. Actually, this word was a word that was used to express not only a huge number of people, but also the unity of their testimony or their witness. You know, based on this verse, there are some folks who believe that the author is describing people in heaven who right now are watching what we do on earth. For example, there is this heartwarming story about a young boy who so desperately wanted to play football, signed up, but actually sat on the bench all of the time. His dad never gave up encouraging him and supporting him, but the boy just never played. And when he went away to college, he tried out for the college team, and somehow, to everyone's surprise, he made the team, more because of his inspiration rather than his skill. And even though he warmed the bench his entire college career, his father bought season tickets and came to every game. At the end of his senior season, he got word that his dad had died. The coach told him that he could miss practices and not even have to show up for the final game of the season. But on that big day, the boy was there, and he begged for a chance to play on the field. The coach gave him the opportunity, and he performed brilliantly, even contributing to winning the game himself. Later, the coach said, "Kid, I can't believe it. You were fantastic. Tell me what got into you. How did you do it?" And with tears in his eyes, he said, "Coach, you know that my dad came to every single game, but you may not have known that he was blind." He said he had never seen me play, But today was the first chance he could see me play, and I just wanted to show him I could do it. Tugs at your heart, doesn't it? Makes you feel good. The problem is, it's probably not true. Even worse, it's theologically off base. The author of Hebrews isn't talking about people who are up in heaven watching what we do on earth. As a matter of fact, I don't really know of any place in the Scripture that teaches that people in heaven can even do that. See, the picture here is that we are in a race called the Christian life. And there are people who are sitting in the stands who are cheering us on, and all of them are previous competitors who've all run and finished the race. Their witness, their testimony is to encourage us on so that we can finish too. Now, last week we began looking at some godly decisions that you can make for this year. And the first one we took from our brother, the Apostle Paul, and we said, you can make the godly decision to make Jesus the one thing, to press on. And forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead, pressing on toward the goal for the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Here in this chapter, the author of Hebrews challenges us with another godly decision. And here it is. Run through the tape. You say, what? Run through the tape. How do you do that? First of all, you run freely. Notice he says, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. And when Daniel was reading that passage this morning, I was just struck by the word easily. Jamaican Usain Bolt holds the title of the fastest human alive. On August 16th, 2009, he set the world record in the men's 100-meter race with a time of 9.58 seconds. 3 years later, older and slower, he set the Olympic record at 9.63 seconds. And you realize I am being satirical when I said that he was slower. For all of us, or those of us who are more accustomed to sitting than sprinting, it may be hard for us to appreciate how fast he is. He ran 23.35 miles per hour, which doesn't sound fast, except that it's faster than the estimated average traffic speed in Boston, New York City, and San Francisco. Even more astounding is that Bolt started from a speed of 0 and then had to accelerate, which meant that his top speed was actually faster. Oh, by the way, did I also mention that he holds the world and Olympic records in the 200 meters as well? Can you imagine what it would be like to come watch Usain Bolt along with other top runners across the world to run the 100, 200 meters? I mean, only fractions of seconds separate these world-class runners. While the marathon is a test of stamina and endurance, the 100 meters is an explosion of power that's over in less than 10 seconds. And if you've ever run the sprints, then you know that it's not a long race, and it can even be won at the start or lost at the start. But I want you to imagine that as you come to watch this race, as the runners are coming to the starting blocks, there's something that seems a little strange, out of place. It doesn't make any sense. So you pick up your binoculars to get a better view, and what you see is that strapped around Usain Bolt's legs, his ankles, are 50-pound weights. For whatever reason, he's decided to run with an extra load. Now, I got to tell you, fastest man alive or not, there is no way he's going to win that race. Therefore, since we have this great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. Lay aside everything, anything, throw it off. Be done with any obstacle, any impediment that weighs you down and hinders your spiritual running. Take it off. Strip down. Get rid of any sinful thought, action, habit, or relationship, because sin will trip you up and cause you to fall. There is an old, horrible story about a man who went to play golf one Saturday morning. And when he didn't return at dinner time, his wife was concerned. Finally, about midnight, he came through the door exhausted. "Where have you been?" I've been playing golf. But that was 18 hours ago. What happened? He said, I was having the best game of my life. I was 2 under par. And on the 7th tee, Harry had a heart attack and died. And after that, it was hit the ball and drag Harry and hit the ball. I told you that it was a horrible story. Ancient track competition like today had to undergo intense practice. Olympic athletes had to swear that they had undergone 10 months of rigorous training before competing, and that last month was spent under the authority and the eye of an Olympic instructor under whom they disciplined themselves to remove unwanted body weight. In fact, the Greek tense of the verb here of lay aside means that this is something that you need to do before you even start to run. And it actually lines up with the accounts of the Greek customs of runners stripping clothes prior to running so that they might run unencumbered. We are also to remove anything in our lives that hinders our running. I got to tell you, this is intensely practical. Is there something or someone slowing you down in your spiritual life? Are you trying to run with extra weight? Are you dragging something behind you? Get rid of it. In fact, the Greek verb means you get rid of it. Get rid of it now and do it. Because if we're going to run, we have to run freely. Secondly, we need to run focused. There are some key phrases and words here to consider. And the first is we are to run. This is actually the main verb of the verse. And it means what you think it means. It means to run. It means to move quickly, to rush ahead, to exert yourself, to make progress. It doesn't mean to take a leisurely walk or stroll. The word means to run and keep running because the race is a lifelong race. One person put it this way: all those who are born again must run. From the moment that we believe in Jesus, we are enrolled in a race. The new birth gets us to the starting line, but it doesn't get us to the finish line. Unfortunately, this person says many Christians are just jogging, some are walking slowly, and some are sitting or even lying down. Yet the biblical standard for holy living is a race, not a morning constitutional. We are to run. Notice we are to run with endurance. Actually, a better translation is we are to run through endurance. Or through endurance, let us keep running. This isn't some kind of passive patience, but it is an emphasis on effort and struggle, and which, by the way, might be an argument that he's not talking about a sprint. Even the word for race means to engage in an intense struggle, and we get our English word agony from this Greek word. I don't know if you're familiar with the hymn, "Oh Love That Will Not Let Me Go." It's an old one, and perhaps not one of our most familiar ones, but it was written in 1882 by a Scottish minister, George Matheson, who as a young man in college began to lose his eyesight. Engaged at the time, his fiancée, concerned about the challenges of caring for a blind husband the rest of her life, told him that she couldn't go through life with a blind man, and she called off the engagement and broke George's heart. He went blind while he was studying for the ministry, and his eldest sister took her dejected brother into her home, and she assisted him in the completion of his studies and for his ordination. She read the Bible to him, transcribed his dictated sermons, assisted him in the memorization of his weekly sermons, and listened reverently in the congregation as one of the congregants as he delivered the Sunday morning sermons. Now, eventually, though, his sister married, leaving George, who was now 40 years of age, alone. And his sister's marriage brought the fresh reminder of his own heartbreak. It was in the midst of this circumstances with intense sadness that Matheson wrote the hymn, which he said was written in about 5 minutes. Years later, he recalled the pain of that night, and he told how that on that occasion he had penned his most famous hymn. Listen to a few words of his testimony. It was the night of my sister's marriage, and the rest of the family were staying overnight in Glasgow. Something happened to me which was known only to myself and which caused me the most severe mental suffering. And then he makes a statement. The hymn was the fruit of that suffering. I don't know if we often think of suffering bearing fruit, but I want you to listen to something else he wrote. He said, we commonly associate patience with lying down. We think of it as the angel that guards the couch of the invalid. Yet there's a patience that I believe to be harder, the patience that can run. To lie down in the time of grief, to be quiet under the stroke of adverse fortune, implies a great strength. But I know of something that implies a strength greater still. It is the power to work under stress, to have a great weight at your heart and still run, to have a deep anguish in your spirit and still perform daily tasks. It is a Christ-like thing. The hardest thing is that most of us are called to exercise our patience, not in the sickbed, but in the street. Running focused means we are to run. We are to run with endurance. And the author says that we are to run fixing our eyes on Jesus. Someone put it this way, it's having vertical vision in a horizontal race. It means that we look away from all else and we steadfastly look towards a distant object, giving undivided attention to the one thing to the exclusion of everything else. You know, in a race, whether it's the sprint or even others, looking back to see where other runners are can not only be a dangerous thing, but it can cost you the race. That's exactly what happened in the 1954 Olympic Games in Vancouver, where the eyes of the world were fixed on Roger Bannister and John Landry, the two fastest milers in the world at the time. It was being called the Miracle Mile, as the world was waiting to see for the first sub-4-minute mile race. Now, I realize today that that's not an unusual thing, but it was then. And this race lived up to the expectations. Landry quickly took the lead in the first laps, but he made a mistake from which he could not recover. He took a moment to look over his right shoulder to see where Bannister was, and in that moment, Bannister shot past him and dashed ahead to beat Landry by 5 yards and run a sub-4-minute mile. To run focus means to fix your eyes on Jesus, blocking out other distractions. Running to win the race of your life. Why? Because Jesus, the writer of Hebrews says, is the author and perfecter of faith. The word could mean that Jesus is the goal and the objective of our faith, but the word for author means the one who goes on the path first, the leader, the prince, the pioneer, the trailblazer. He's the one who causes something to begin, the originator, the founder, the initiator, the forerunner who arrives at the destination where others are to follow. You see, Jesus Christ is the preeminent example of what it means to live a life of faith. All of those heroes in the 11th chapter of Hebrews may have been wonderful witnesses and examples of faith, but Jesus is the perfect example of faith. He lived a perfect, sinless life. And he lived in perfect obedience to his Father's will. I want you to think about that for a second. That means that he never got off course. He never ran his own path. He never started his own race. He is the supreme example of somebody who has run and run successfully, completed the race, who's reached the goal, carrying faith to its completion and gaining the prize. Look at verse 13. It says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus stands at the starting line, and he's also there at the finish line. He shows us how to run. We are to run freely, and we are to run focused, and we are to run to the finish. It's worth observing that we are in a race that the author says is set before or placed before us. Again, the Greek grammar seems to point that the author is talking about a specific race. Perhaps there's a reference to each runner having a specific lane in which to run. Listen, you aren't called to run somebody else's race. You're to run yours. It implies that you don't get to decide what race it is. You can't make up your course. God is the one who sets the course. The idea is like a road that's stretched out before your view. A couple of summers ago, Nancy and I took a walk on a path at Elk Neck State Park. And what I remember about this path is that you could see way ahead. And then you would walk that section and you'd go around a turn, and then you could see way ahead. And it was hot. And by the time we got to our destination, which was an old lighthouse, we were pretty tired. The walk back was even harder, because now seeing that path way ahead was discouraging. Because I knew that once we had walked that section, I was going to see another long section, and I still would not be at our destination. When we finally made it back to our car, I was convinced that we had walked about 10 miles that day. Turns out it was only about a mile each way, but it just felt a whole lot longer. Regarding this specific race that we're called to run, F.B. Meyer wrote, there will, of course, be difficulties in our lives which impede our heavenward progress. Difficulties from the opposition of foes. Difficulties from within our own hearts. We will need patience and long forbearance as we tread our appointed track. But there are two sources of comfort open to us. Let us remember that the course is set before us by our Heavenly Father, who therefore knows all the roughness and straightness and will make all grace abound towards us, sufficient in our need. There's a story about a world-class runner who was invited to compete in a race in Connecticut. And on the morning of the race, she drove from New York City, followed directions, or so she thought, that had been given her a telephone. So she got lost, and she stopped at a gas station and asked for help. She knew that the race was going to begin at a parking lot of a shopping mall, and the station attendant knew of such a race that was just up the road, and so he directed her there. When she arrived, she was relieved to see in the parking lot a modest number of runners who were preparing to compete. There weren't as many as she anticipated, an easier race than she was led to expect. She hurried to the registration desk, announced herself, and was surprised by the race officials' excitement of having so renowned an athlete show up for their race. No, they didn't have a record of her entry, but if she'd hurry and put on a number, she could get there just before the gun went off. She ran and naturally, easily won, even 4 minutes ahead of the first male runner who came in second place. Only after the race, when there was no envelope containing a sizable amount of prize money, did she confirm that the event that she had run was not the race to which she had been invited. That race was being held several miles further up the road in another town. She had gone to the wrong starting line, and she ran the wrong course and missed her chance to win a valuable prize. Jesus has set a course for you to run. But if you're running your own race, you're wasting your time. Run the race that he has set before you. Run freely. Run focused. And run to the finish. By 7 o'clock on October 20th, 1968, at the Mexico City of Olympic Stadium, it was beginning to darken, and it had cooled down as well. The last of the Olympic marathon runners were being assisted away to first aid stations. Over an hour earlier, Momo Valdi of Ethiopia had charged across the finish line, winning the 26-mile, 385-yard race, looking as strong and vigorous as when he had started. As the last few thousand spectators were preparing to leave, they heard police sirens and whistles through the gate entering the stadium. the attention turned to that gate, and a sole figure wearing the colors of Tanzania came limping into the stadium. His name was John Stephen Akhwari. He was the last man to finish the marathon in 1968. His leg was bandaged and bloody. He had taken a bad fall early in the race. Now it was all he could do to limp his way around the track. The crowd stood and applauded as he completed the last lap. When he finally crossed the finish line, one man dared ask the question that many were wondering. "You are badly injured. Why didn't you quit? Why didn't you give up?" And Akhwari, with quiet dignity, said, "My country did not send me 7,000 miles to start this race. My country sent me to finish." You see, in most races, awards are given for the top finishers. But here, this prize is given for everyone who finishes the race. You see, crossing the finish line makes you a winner. And from the preceding chapter, there's this great host of competitors of faith who've already successfully finished that race. They are cheering you on, encouraging you to victory. You can do it. What godly decision can you make this year? Run through the tape. Run freely. Run focused. Run to finish. Let's pray.